Come on. Sorry. Hi, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this interesting and hopefully a session where we'll cover a whole range of topics around what does it mean to finance the future. I mean, I think we can all agree that we definitely see, and actually the speech we just had from the Minister, of how important financial services is to the government, to the economy. But actually quite a lot of financial services isn't visible. It's just an enabler. It enables, if you look at Manchester here, I was here 30 years ago, and maybe those were the Hacienda days. I don't know how many people remember that. But it wasn't like this, right? So there's been a lot of investment, whether it's enabling through funding, through debt, equity, insurance, reinsurance. So there's quite a lot of investment and a role, a lubrication role that financial services can play in regional growth. I'm delighted that we've got a panel that comes across from retail, infrastructure, insurance, and actually fintech as well. So I'm looking forward to people's views on how we think about this as a region. So personally, my name is Armoghan Mohammed. I'm the regional chair for PwC. I was just counting how long I've been in financial services, and it's 36 years this year. It has gone really quickly, and it's an amazing profession once someone gets into it. It took me a while to get in, but it's an amazing profession. And personally, I'm really keen that we encourage more people from various socio-economic backgrounds to join this profession. It's fantastic. But without further ado, I'm going to invite my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. Before that, the way we're structuring the session is a game of two halves. I've got some prepared questions for the first 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to ask yourselves and people who are online to actually submit questions. And I've got a trusty iPad here, which it will come through to me, and we've got a roving mic as well, so we look forward to your questions as well. If you think of any in the meantime, as we're talking, please just submit them, and I'll make sure we ask them. So thank you very much. Natalie, could I just ask the panel to introduce themselves as we are sat?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone, I'm Natalie Boswell. I am the Regional Development Director for Lloyds Bank, covering the North East and Yorkshire. So thank you for having me on the other side of the Pennines this morning. Just to let you behind the curtain a little bit, when we were doing our briefing call for this panel, Armoghan said, can you tell us a little bit of an interesting fact about yourself for the introduction? For example, have you climbed Everest recently? So that was the bar for being on the panel. And I think the response was, I've got an 11-year-old German Shepherd, so going around the block is our Everest every day. So there's a little bit about me.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Lomas. I'm Managing Director at the UK Infrastructure Bank. I started off life working in retail banking at NatWest before moving into investment banking with infrastructure assets. And then in 2010, I went into HM Treasury, actually, and spent time at Treasury and the Cabinet Office for 10 years, setting up the Green Investment Bank and doing all sorts of other things in government before 2 years ago helping to set up the UK Infrastructure Bank. The bank's been open for 2 years now. We're based in Leeds. We've grown from 6 people to around 220 people, and that's continuing to grow. And we've now made over 20 investments and over £2 billion of investments.
Thank you, Steve.
Hi, I'm Christine Wood. You probably can tell by my accent. I'm a Northeasterner. So I've travelled down from Northumberland this morning. I lead the Northeast region for Aon, where we have a few offices there, but that's part of the bigger North, which includes offices like Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield as well. So it's great to be in Manchester today. I'm a big fan of Manchester. I've got 2 of my actual children living here now. One's in university, and the other one has actually settled here now with a full-time job. So I think the attraction of Manchester is proving very, very attractive for the second one as well. So great to be here. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Richard Wilson, Chief Executive of Interactive Investor and Head of Personal Wealth for Aberdeen PLC. My history is really boring, but I spent 30-odd years working in between the US, Europe, and the UK in commercial, wholesale, retail banks and brokers, trying to find ways to use technology to serve customers. My claim to fame is my headquarters is about 100 yards over the road here, so we're based in Manchester, and we're very happy here.
Splendid. Thank you very much. But let me kick off with the first question. Financial services continues to play a role in enabling growth across the regions and the nations of the United Kingdom. Can you describe some of the main advantages that operating outside of London brings you and your company? And again, I think a bit like the Minister, this is not about, you know, what London doesn't bring, but actually what are the advantages in the regions? We value and appreciate London. And Richard, if I could ask you, given your office is so close, and you'll have had to go through a decision process, where you locate, where your people are, how you hire them, and so forth.
Sure. So our objective, when I joined II, I think at the board originally in 2015 now, and became CEO in 2017, the objective was to build a leading UK retail platform. And between then and the end of 2018, we had offices in Manchester, Leeds, Dundee, Aylesbury, Glasgow. And the question was, where do you anchor your centre? And you do the homework in terms of logistics, skill sets, talent pools. And as an operating technology-driven service business, it was a fairly straightforward decision for me to be based as a headquarters in Manchester. We've got about, I think at the time we had 50 people, now we've got 550. We've got 250 in Leeds and about 50 in London or something. And obviously you get a bit of pressure from your board not to send, because the headquarters was in London, to be based there. And you look at that as a practical question. You want to have a young, dynamic team. You look at access to universities and career pathing, and it just made sense. And we've got no regrets at all over doing it. Sometimes, you know, if you're looking for very specialized skills in market infrastructure and derivatives, then you got to go where some of those skills are. But we hire here, I think, about 200 people a year. And I'm just super proud of the culture, the work ethic, the ambition, and just the common sense nous of the folks around here. So it works for us.
I mean, it's interesting when we look at the people we have in Manchester and the North. One of the key things, they deliberately choose to live and work here. And what they're looking for is a career that will start at their entry level and take them through to whatever level they want to get to. And it's interesting. Do you find that you can offer them that career path here, and they can take it from grad all the way to MD or whatever level people are seeking?
Well, I mean, what I say to the team is, I mean, we're a modest size. I mean, overall, probably 1,000 people. So you can't be all things to all people. But as long as you're prepared to own your own future and be demanding for yourself, we can support most pathways if you have the patience to wait. You can't always do things on the day of the week that you want to. And I don't know anybody in my organization who hasn't got to where they want to get to. And certainly from my experiences around the world, the ones who haven't are the ones who've usually just given up. Because there's no magic. It's about staying at it, looking after your teammates, staying on target. And if you complete, I mean, we're going to facing a fairly high bar now with the arrival of the next wave of technology and AI. To stay relevant, you have to keep focusing, almost paranoid in maintaining your skills. And that's something, if you can support that process, then and make it important, then again, the career pathing, you actually path into careers that are going to exist as opposed to ones that are a legacy.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much. Natalie, if I could turn to you from a Lloyds Bank perspective, but also from some of your experiences of developing businesses here. What are the advantages you see in sort of this region versus, say, London and the southeast?
Yeah, okay. So the objective of regional development within Lloyds is around being a partner to the regeneration of the UK. And this is through working with local authorities, combined authorities, other private sector organisations around economic development, housing, net zero transition. Unfortunately, it's something that's still really important. The UK remains one of the most unequal countries in the world, and the disparity between some of the UK regions from a productivity, an education, a skills perspective is still really significant, and it's been further exacerbated by the current economic backdrop. It's a priority for Lloyds Bank because we are a UK bank, so over 99% of our income comes from the UK. we don't have big multinational operations. We have a really strong regional franchise, and we believe we've got an important role to play in helping address these inequalities. So a bit of context to that. So across all of our brands within Lloyds Banking Group, we have about 26 million customers across people and business. From a business perspective, that equates to about 1 in 5 market share of SMEs that hold their main current account with us. That's significantly higher when you look across all the different product sets like Lex Auto Lease, Scottish Widows. That means that we touch nearly every household and community in the UK, and with that scale comes a real sense of responsibility where we have to be committed to help all of the regions and nations in the UK to prosper. So my role, or a really important part of my role, is to understand how we get out across all the different areas. For me, that's the North East and Yorkshire, to really understand the local businesses, the local authorities, and support the regionally important high growth sectors, clusters, and businesses that are really strategically important. So we got a new CEO about 2 years ago, Charlie Nunn. Charlie took us into growth mode. So to give some context to this, what I'm speaking about is incremental growth. We already have relationship managers all across the UK that work with businesses every day to help raise finance, to support with their banking. Everything that we're looking to do in regional development is in addition to that. And particularly when I think about the interactions that we've had with the mayoral combined authorities, we've found that there's a real appetite to engage and collaborate. And if I give a bit of an example, so working with West Yorkshire Combined Authority and Leeds City Council and with Octopus, we're developing a new retrofit model which will enable homeowners to benefit from a much better customer journey that provides access to alternate funding solutions, because if you all sit there as consumers and think, do I want to spend however much money it is fitting a ground source or an air source heat pump, I'm probably going to have to go to Europe to get the skills. It's not going to add that value to my house. You're not feeling particularly incentivised to do that. If I can just make one final point as well on talent. So I think there's still a bit of a misconception that you have to be in London to work in finance. And that is absolutely not the case. I think I've always worked in Leeds and in the north across my time with Lloyds Bank, and I've been with them for 11 years. We have the highest number of people outside of London based across Yorkshire. We have over 7,000 colleagues. And Leeds is one of the fastest growing tech hubs, so there's this absolute well of talent that we think we can pull in that just isn't really available anywhere else other than that part of the UK. So I hope that gives a bit of a flavour.
Well, that's great, and I actually applaud everything you just said.
Thank you.
Because we, as an organisation, we feel exactly the same way in terms of the split of our people, London versus non-London. In fact, we crossed the threshold from 42% to 50% in the regions in the last 12 months. So we're delighted about that. What was interesting Steve, if I can turn to you, if I may, one of the interesting things that's coming out of that was, if we look at your sort of areas of focus, net zero, levelling up, that touches quite a lot of the stuff Natalie was mentioning. Obviously, your deal size is bigger and you're thinking about, but how does regions versus London, and what are you getting in the regions? You've obviously chosen to base yourselves in Leeds, which I'm sure there was some influence in that somewhere along the line. But how are you finding that as an advantage versus? So,
look, when we were established 2 years ago, our mandate is quite unique. It's to purely look at UK infrastructure. And I think if we look at the deals that we've closed over the last 2 years, they've been across the breadth of the UK, so from Cornwall, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland. We did a deal in the Port of Tyne, we've worked in Teesside. So a lot of the transactions actually have been, in fact, I don't think we've closed a deal in London. So most of our transactions have been in the north of England. And when we were talking earlier, and why is that? But if we think about why the bank was set up, the transition to net zero and regional and local economic growth, that's our sort of, every deal that we do has to tick one or both of those boxes. A lot of the transition to net zero is actually happening in the north. The type of transactions that we're considering at the moment, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind, floating offshore wind, the manufacturing and the supply chain for infrastructure, a lot of it is basically in the sort of the industrial heartlands of the north. So a lot of activity in my role and my team's role is meeting and discussing potential loan opportunities with projects in the north of England. I was in Blyth last week on a project. I'm in Newcastle the week after next, talking to potential borrowers again. So I think, look, we're UK-wide, and we will go where the need requires us. But we're certainly seeing at the moment a lot of the projects are in the north of England.
Could I just ask a follow-up then? Why do you think that is the case, that they just happen to?
I think it's because, just in terms of the history of, where carbon capture and hydrogen, the skill set is here, and those sort of heavy engineering, industrial types of activities, where we're now moving towards transitioning to net zero, that's where it's happening. Yeah. And certainly for the offshore wind and the manufacturing for blades, for cable, etc., a lot of it is happening, gigafactories as well, in the north of England. Yeah.
And there's a surprising amount of skill and experience from the oil and gas industry that can very nicely play into this if we transition it well. Thank you. Christine, similarly, I mean, from an Aon, a brokerage, insurance, you've obviously got a whole range of, offices up here. What are you finding as the advantages here, or what does it allow you to do?
Well, Aon, obviously, it's a global company, and our HQ in the UK is London, and London will always be the capital of insurance. It always will be. But what we're finding is the regions are so important for our clients. So we've got many offices dotted all around the UK, and the regions are hugely important in terms of our client proposition. I think we start with the client, so what do they want? And they really value that local service. They value the local service in terms of we're part of their business community. So not only are we their advisor and their insurance broker, and we're advising on risk and mitigating risk and how they can move forward and grow, we're working hand in hand with them and the business community as well. And I think that's really important to be seen in the business community as financial services as well as just in London as well. So I've worked in London. Yeah. And I've worked in different regions as well, but I have to say I really enjoy working in a region. It's my job probably requires me to be in London probably once a fortnight, and that's fine, and it works. It really works. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned as well since we had the pandemic, where we were all working from home. There's a realization that actually you don't actually need to be in London, and our leaders don't need to be in London either. So as a result of that, we've got many senior people not based in London. They're based in all parts of the UK, including Scotland, and that works fine. So I think, with the right connectivity, with the right infrastructure as well to be able to deliver the service our clients needs, to be in the regions with them and working with them and getting involved with the schools of the region and getting involved with the universities of the region to try and attract, those people that might not want to be in London. Not everybody wants to be in London, and not everybody can be in London. So I think we really try to promote the opportunity that's available in this sector outside. And our recent graduate intake and our apprentice intake as well, it's just growing and growing and growing. And as a leader of the business, that really excites me. Yeah. I've just been in this business 11 years now. And I think somebody said it before, but I wish I'd got into it earlier, because we're privileged to work with, not just in our own sector, but we're servicing a lot of other sectors. So you mentioned oil and gas, and we've got a lot of that in our region, and some really exciting projects coming through. For example, the regeneration in Teesside. That's fantastic. There's a region that was, doomed as it had failed, and it had so much unemployment, and it had a lot of problems. And now we've got this regeneration project working with local government to bring in excess of 20,000 jobs and some major innovation and expertise to the northeast. So there's loads we can get involved in financial services and professional services, and in our game we do risk and mitigate risks, so we try and help these businesses grow and prosper. So it works beautifully in Aon to have I think we're probably the same as you, with a bigger proportion outside of London. And I think that will continue as we go forward.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And one of the things we've found actually is certainly in the regions where we're finding relationship building is even more important. Whereas London can sometimes feel a bit transactional at times, but actually in the regions it's even more, the emphasis on relationships. And maybe because they're smaller markets as well, so who you get to know, you meet the people regularly, and there's an opportunity to build deeper and longer term relationships. I'm going to move to, actually we've got some absolutely brilliant questions coming in. Actually, some of them would have been great being asked of the previous speaker. I mean, there's some, but I'll come on to those in a minute. But before that, actually, I want to just pivot away the other side to that question, which is we've kind of regaled ourselves with the advantages of working in the regions and in the north. What do you find are the challenges, if I could start with you, Natalie, of actually working and living and developing careers here?
Yeah, so I think if we start by taking a bit of a step back, there's a huge amount of will in the private sector to engage in driving economic growth in the UK. The Minister mentioned the Mansion House Compact, which is a great example around private finance wanting to be involved around pension investment. The challenge is around creating investable propositions and an economic environment that actually allows finance to flow. We've not had that level of certainty for quite a long time, and going into an election year, we probably will continue not to have that certainty. On top of that, there are regional challenges, so planning is an issue everywhere. Transport is obviously a priority in the north. That feels like a bit of an echo chamber at times. But if I think about the work we're doing across the regions, having really strong and empowered regional authorities makes such a difference. And devolution is still really new, and we're all learning together, but it gives Lloyds and other investors the confidence to engage with and invest in projects that really matter to local economies. And we as an institution really welcome the work that the UK Infrastructure Bank is doing in providing the opportunity to crowd in private finance. And a really good example of one that we were involved in and that we'd like to see more of was an investment which saw both Lloyds and UKIB in was an investment in GigaClear, which provided 250,000 rural homes with ultra-fast broadband. And if we can, a few of those makes a huge difference. And then the supply chain and the investment that follows is really significant.
Fantastic. And Steve, I could ask the same question to yourself. I'm then going to pivot to one of the other questions we've had, but I'd like to ask you in the terms
You can't steal my example.
No, well, you just blow my
we keep hearing about all the great stuff you're doing, so thank you.
So in my world, in terms of infrastructure, the barriers are not really linked to location per se. I think one of the key sort of themes, and it came out this morning in some of the discussions, is making sure that the UK is attractive for investment. We're in a competition with the rest of the world in terms of net zero. Investors can now build their offshore wind farm here, France, Taiwan, US. They have choices, and therefore making the environment has to be right for them to invest. So I think, in the UK, some of the hurdles that we're seeing at the moment, obviously higher interest rates, inflation, are causing the strain on those infrastructure projects and making decisions to go ahead even harder. So there's delays in building infrastructure. I think we also have delays in decision making, and we need to get decisions made from a policy perspective to make some of these projects move forward. We've seen CCUS and hydrogen projects have taken a very long time. We've been talking about carbon capture for 12 years, and hopefully next year we'll start to see some of our first transactions. But it takes time. It takes 12 years for an offshore wind farm to go through the planning, the consents to actually producing renewable energy. That sort of timescale needs to come down. So I think from our perspective, it's how do we speed some of these projects up, get the decision-making process, because that will encourage inward investment. And what we want to do is actually crowd in that investment. So we've been set up to take on some of the riskier transactions. From where I started 20 years ago, investing in roads, rail, social infrastructure, they were relatively easy in comparison to what we're seeing today. And some of the new technology, some of the risks that we're being asked to consider as a financing community, whether it's demand risk for EV charging or technology risks for sustainable aviation fuel. There's new risks that we're all going to have to get our heads around. So that's why we're here. We're here to support that market. And we've also got I think just to add, we've got a local authority lending and advisory team. And that's been growing over the last 12 months. And I think that's really important. We've been working very closely, certainly with Greater Manchester Combined Authority over the last 12 months on zero-emission buses and also on heat networks. I think it's a good example where we can go in and provide, I call it advisory, it's more of a, we're not trying to take over from PwC, but it's more of a critical friend. We go in and provide some independent advice to local authorities. And actually our goal is to, if we're successful in creating something with a local authority, we want to then share that with other local authorities and share that structure, that financing structure or funding structure. And I think you're going to see much more of us in that local authority space.
And I think that can only be good, because it'll allow people to have conversations that actually you can take to the next stage, but much quicker. Yeah. Let me jump to one of the questions here, and Richard, I'd quite like to get your thoughts on this, if I may. It says, if you had a magic wand, what one immediate policy change would you make to help increase UK retail participation in capital markets and improve consumer outcomes? I'm assuming that's not the conversation you were having on the side.
It was exactly why I'm late. Well, am I stuck with one thing? Yeah. I mean, obviously, that would be the Transpennine Railway. Fix that.
Well, let's say three then. Two or three.
So one thing is a simplified advice definition, so that we can automate advice and make that available to the 10 million people who are not supported in their financial life. Two is I'd wipe out the stamp duty. One of the reasons why we're losing to other markets is because we're taxing every transaction, so the players innovate out of it, irrational decisions get made, and it's concentrated only on FTSE 100 stocks, which it was only done because they could get the money as opposed to it making any sense. So they're trying to tell their dog to win a race while standing on its neck and wondering why it is that the dog's whining a lot. It's not that complicated. And three, I would change the preemption rules to stop retail investors being blocked out of primary and secondary offers. And I'd also have a quota system in place for primary issuers, so you're forced to offer to retail unless you can explain why not. That might be 4 or 5 things.
No, that's absolutely.
That's my shopping list. That's why we got held up outside a little bit. Where are you?
No, absolutely. And we should be advocating. I mean, some of the points you made, we were at a dinner last night, a financial services dinner, and those same topics were coming up, very similar, particularly the stamp duty one.
See, and it's a silly thing. It's a silly thing because we charge 0.5% for purchase transactions only on FTSE 100, which means we exempted ETFs, you exempted open-end funds, you exempted AIM stocks. The US has got a tax, but it's applied across all securities, so it's a tiny percentage as opposed to the 0.5, and it only raises $4 billion a year. It's just a silly thing to do, and for markets to succeed, the basic rule of the market, I spent my whole life in clearing and in capital markets, liquidity defines your life or death, and you have to have flow of liquidity or you can't survive. What you don't do is compromise that so that you then provide choices to other markets. Mm-hmm. Stamp duty on houses, you can't avoid. You can't bypass that and buy it through the New York market if you're buying a house here. If it's stamp duty on stock, you can bypass that, like, I won't say the name, by having CFDs in a Cyprus registered company or simply listing somewhere else. So it's a silly, self-defeating thing and just needs to get sorted. I'm off my soapbox now, sorry.
Thank you. We like your passion. Thank you. Natalie, there's another question came here which kind of touched on some of the things you were talking about in terms of actually what. So let me just, it talks about the devolved powers and engaging with the new Metro Mayor model. And the question is, how have you found engaging with the new Metro Mayor model since it was rolled out across the country? And what further powers do you feel, what would help, what further powers could be devolved to some of those mayors to drive further growth in the areas, in the regions?
Yeah.
And we saw some of that yesterday, and there were some references to that yesterday in the autumn statement.
So when we were originally building the regional development programme, we looked at other kind of how the rest of the world was doing it and how the rest of the UK was doing it, and what we can take. So what other places do, it's not replicable. Regulation is different, structure is different, devolved power is different. So this sort of cookie cutter approach doesn't quite work. But we can take bits that work really well and bring them in. And I think there's elements of seeing that in the devolution Metro Mayor model. It's not perfect, and obviously some places have slightly stronger and better deals than others. But it's called a trailblazer deal for a reason. And we've got the opportunity to evidence to government that we can have the autonomy of decision making and deliver success. I think if I speak from a personal perspective, dealing with the mayors that I look after, so sort of the North East, Teesside, West and South Yorkshire, I think we've been welcomed with open arms, really, in terms of how we're looking to support the region, especially in West Yorkshire, because we have so many people based there with our Leeds and Halifax head offices. I think the announcement in the autumn statement around further devolution into the Cumbria and what's already happening in York and North Yorkshire, every single part of Yorkshire will have a Metro Mayor, and I think that's really positive. And we've seen the benefit of when they can come together. So we saw the Northern Labour mayors come together against TransPennine when that got really bad, and we can see the benefit that can have. I think there was potentially a part of central government that was kicking themselves at that point with the northern mayors making a lot of noise, but I think that's where we can see some of the strength.
Perfect, thank you very much. One of the things I guess I wanted to ask you, Steve, was around financial literacy. You know, you mentioned the local authorities. I know you have indeed appointed someone to lead that for you. Where do you think we are, and what sort of steps do you think we can take in addition to just improve that? Because part of people getting into the profession, actually is an understanding of what it does and the impact it has. And as I said, some of it's actually, whilst it's an enabler, some of it's actually hidden. So how do we get that out, and how do we improve people's understanding of financial services and also actually making them more adept at it?
Yeah, look, it's not everyone needs to read a loan agreement and understand the sort of the detail of a project financing or infrastructure financing. I think there is an awareness point, and I think the general public probably don't really have an understanding or a view of whether it's Lloyds or UK Infrastructure Bank that's involved in a transaction. So we probably need to. We're all trying to do that and to show where we're adding value. I think when it comes to local authorities, of course, resourcing has been an issue. They've had, staff have been cut. So one of their biggest issues is they want to be involved in these projects, or they want to consider them, but they just don't have the time or the resource to do it. And I think that's where we can come in and play this sort of critical friend role. And I was involved with one with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and we just ran a couple of workshops where we just brainstormed some funding models for a transport deal. And actually just stepping back, and taking a 50,000-foot look at some of this to say, here's the basics. Can you deliver a X billion pound project? What would you need in terms of revenues to deliver that? And it became quite clear quite quickly that allly the desire was quite overwhelming in terms of what they wanted. Was it achievable? But going in and sort of kicking the tires and testing that with people, and you don't need to be an investment banker to sort of. It's not that clever, but actually taking it back to basics and speaking with the right people in the room from the right departments within the local authority, just to kick the tires and test the funding story, the revenues, the construction costs, etc. I think that's really important, and that's something that we're now doing across. We've met with 150 local authorities in the last 2 years. We've met with all the mayoral authorities, and we're working at the moment. We've had 3 pilots with Bristol, Greater Manchester, and Glasgow, and we've got another 10 projects with local authorities that we're about to commence.
How are the pilots going?
They've gone really well, actually. I think the work we've done with Greater Manchester on the buses and the heat networks has been a real positive. And as I said earlier, what we want to now do is take some of that learning across to other local authorities. Now that work's been done, and I think that was when I worked in the private sector. We would do a lot of transactions, a lot of PPP transactions. You could do a deal in Bradford, and then you'd spend 2 years on it and then start again in Leeds. There was never any of that follow-on or lessons learned. And I think trying to get some of that education passed across the local authorities and sharing that knowledge is really important.
No, and it's quite interesting you're targeting that sector, because it's probably a sector that hasn't been targeted before.
Yeah.
In quite the same.
No, and we can also lend. I mean, we provide the advisory service, but we now have the ability to lend very cheaply to local authorities, so at a rate that's sort of effectively half of that of the Public Works Loan Board. So we can be flexible and we can provide cheap finance to local authorities.
Thank you. And Christine, a very similar question. In terms of financial literacy and insurance, educating people in your communities, how is that? What's Aon's sort of perspective on that, and what are you finding works? Whether that's your graduate intake or how you take people through?
Yeah. There's all sorts of ways, to be honest with you, but within Aon, there's a very keen desire for everybody to be developed in every which way they want to be developed, but it always starts with the client. So that's our starting point. So what that client needs, and I think in terms of the language, it's really important we get that right with clients too, so they understand. It's like you were saying, not everybody can read an insurance policy from start to finish and understand it, but it's our job as brokers is to understand that client's risk and then articulate it into the insurance market. And that goes back to the point about really getting close to clients and really understanding their business and getting almost like one of their team. So that's the way that we do it in terms of trying to get the best out of the insurance market, which has been quite challenging, I have to say.
Yes, yeah.
But and it's interesting, we were talking earlier about how we can make that easier for businesses, and businesses will always have to take risks. Some will say, without risk, there is no reward. However, there are some things that get in the way of businesses with a little bit appetite to increase their risk appetite a little further, to invest more, or to maybe to engage in different economic activities. And we talked about regulation, and I think regulation is always a bit of a barrier in anything that we do. Sometimes it can get in the way, and I understood what Bim was saying about, the regulators have a big part to play, and so do we. But I think appropriate regulation is absolutely key. A regulation that actually encourages us to be a bit more entrepreneurial and to take on new business activities, rather than it create a sort of an atmosphere where, it's a bit too risky, I'm not going to do that because it's just too complicated, or it's too laborious, and it's not as easy just to see the end result from the start. So I think that's where we really try and work hard with our clients to cut through that and to help them make better decisions through what we learn from their businesses and the risks that they face.
Thank you very much. And I think there was a great question from the floor as well for Bim, wasn't there? The balance between risk and regulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
It feels like he may discover lots of things in the coming weeks.
Yes.
He has those meetings, so we look forward to that. I've actually got just enough time for one more question, Richard, if I may. And it says, financial services and related professional services is the biggest net exporting industry in the country. Do politicians appreciate this, or will they continue to focus on good due to the nice photo ops and high visibility ops in trade deals?
Thank you for that question, whoever that was. Listen, what we need just consistency and confidence that whatever framework's in place is going to stay there with people that are going to stay around. We can just, in terms of the talent in this country, we've got enough talent to win anything, providing that you know what the rules of the game are and you're not disabled unfairly. Do we have some politicians being politicians? I'll tell you my actual experience, and it's not unique to Manchester, but Manchester matters most because I'm based here, and it's one exception to that, which is probably Leeds actually. But in Manchester, what we've done, which is actually quite hard, I mean, we've built what by some measure was the most successful fintech in Europe, we did that without any help at all from anybody in Manchester. None of the authorities. In terms of practical support, there was none. Lots of jibber-jabbering and sort of noises, but in terms of actual connection with talent, actual infrastructure, actual support, even a visit to the office from the mayor after 5 years, we was too busy. So there's a little bit of politicking, which would be nice to have people on the ground actually in the trenches doing stuff. Scotland, to be fair, the First Minister, her support at the time was to say, you're lucky to be here, so that wasn't so good. So thank you for that. Leeds, to be fair, they've been very supportive and proactive. And
I think you referenced Tracy Brabin.
They've been the exception. They've been knocking on the door a lot. So we just need professional politicians that stick to the knitting, keep their promises, and show up.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, you can't ask for more than that, can you? Thank you very much.
No.
Sounds like a manifesto there. Thank you very much. Please, can you join me in thanking our panelists? Fantastic.